Hey guys, tonight we slip into something unironically dull. You're standing in the middle of a scriptorium deep inside the Han Dynasty, somewhere around the 1st century CE, and let me tell you, it smells like ink, sweat, and disappointment. The floor creaks under piles of bamboo slips, tied together with string. Each page is a thin plank, and every single note, record, and imperial memo is painstakingly scratched into this wood, like you're carving a love letter into a park bench with less romance and more fiscal policy. Your job? Transcribe tax complaints from 3 provinces, using a brush that's losing its bristles and a pile of thin bamboo that's as forgiving as a bad-tempered goose. And you're not alone. There's a whole team of weary scribes slouching over their desks, some nodding off mid-sentence. A senior clerk just dropped his inkstone, which splashed on a half-finished report. The resulting stain looks suspiciously like your manager's expression, judgmental and tired. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, if you're still awake enough to type, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing where my sleepy historians are drifting off around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the uneven floorboards of the record room, trying not to trip over a crooked pile of bamboo tax ledgers. One of them is from a village that tried to pay taxes in fermented beans. You're not sure if that's clever or criminal. These bamboo slips, they creak, they clatter, they splinter. If you drop a scroll, it doesn't flutter quietly to the floor like modern paper. No, it crashes like a box of maracas, and you lose 20 minutes trying to reassemble the pieces in the right order. Historians still argue whether the average scribe in the Han Dynasty was literate in multiple dialects or just memorized bureaucratic buzzwords to bluff through report writing. Either way, your brain is a soup of legal phrases, provincial names, and ink fumes. And here's the real kicker. Your back hurts, your neck hurts, your spirit crumbling like a dried-out jujube. Because to do all this for 8 hours, perched on a stool without a cushion, in a room with no windows, on a summer afternoon, that's not just history. That's a medieval form of cardio. Occasionally, your supervisor strolls in and drops new assignments, like he's tossing coal into a steam engine. Transcribe this border dispute, and this request for flood relief, and this suspicious poetry that might be anti-emperor. You blink at the growing stack and wonder if there's an early retirement plan. Spoiler, there's not. Here's a quirky fact: some Han officials tried to bribe their way out of paperwork by commissioning scroll readers to act as bamboo whisperers, literally narrating reports aloud so lazy nobles didn't have to read. It was like audiobook scrolls, minus the soothing voices and with extra political peril. You sigh and brush your ink across another stiff, narrow slip. It's a census report from a village with 12 pigs, 3 goats, and 1 man named Cricket Teeth. You pause. Could be a transcription error, or someone got creative. But the worst part isn't the noise, or the weight, or the Bacchus's, the slowness. One single bamboo record takes hours to prepare. From cutting the slip, smoothing the edges, stringing them together, to drying the ink and storing them upright like some cursed version of Jenga. 1 drop of water, and the whole document warps beyond recognition. The empire's hunger for records is only growing. Under Emperor Han Wudihu, historians still argue was either a visionary or a micromanaging lunatic. The administrative web stretches across thousands of miles. From grain inventories in Sichuan to military drafts in Gansu, every tiny detail must be written, stored, and sometimes duplicated by hand. Bamboo, noble as it is, simply can't keep up. You stare at the stack of scrolls awaiting your brush and realize something. This can't go on forever. The empire is expanding. So are the ledgers. Eventually, the weight of its own paperwork might topple the Han like a giant bureaucratic domino set. Somewhere, something has to give. And as you rub your ink-stained fingers and glance longingly at a discarded rag in the corner, you don't know it yet, but change is coming. Not a political revolt or a foreign invasion. Number. Something softer, flatter, lighter. Something that doesn't clatter when dropped. And something that, in the most beautiful irony of all, will make imperial paperwork even more insufferable by making it faster. But for now, you pull another bamboo slip toward you. Just 1 more record before your evening rice gruel. You scratch in the village name, list the tax amounts, and try not to fall asleep. Because paper hasn't been invented yet, and you probably won't survive this workload. You haul the bundle across the administrative complex, grunting like a donkey with something to prove. The bamboo slips dig into your shoulder. Each one is about the size of a ruler, but together they weigh more than your cousin's second wife. The string binding them bites into your palms as you climb yet another staircase. These imperial buildings love height almost as much as they love red lacquer. You're delivering tax records to a district minister who insists on inspecting every scroll himself. The man collects data like he collects cats obsessively, and with very little regard for your spine. You've made this trek so many times your sandals have grooves worn into the soles, and yet the bamboo never seems to get lighter. The real frustration? These things break. 1 wrong jostle, and the brittle slip splits down the grain. If it cracks near the character for land tax, you could accidentally transform a farmer into a criminal or worsey noble. One time, your fellow clerk dropped an entire record book on the steps. To took 6 clerks, 3 translators, and a minor exorcism to reassemble the order. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some historians argue that bamboo wasn't even the most efficient choice available, but it was cheap and symbolic. Wood symbolized durability and authority, while silk, though lighter, was reserved for high culture, not accounting. You can't very well scold a farmer using poetry on silk. It lacks punch. Today's scroll is for a village called East Cow Nose, and it includes details about granary reserves, suspicious ghost sightings, again, and 3 goats that may or may not have been stolen by the same priest who swore he was fasting. You roll your eyes. Bureaucracy in action. You pause halfway up the steps, your legs trembling. The bundle shifts. You catch it just in time, but one slip slips. It clatters down 6 stone steps, bounces off a servant's foot, and disappears under a cart full of pickled radish. You pretend not to notice. Nobody ever reads page 47 anyway. This is your life in the Han bureaucracy. A world where every official wants more records, but no one wants to carry them. The higher-ups dream of a perfectly documented empire, every pig registered, every flood tallied, every mildly treasonous poem logged. But the reality? The whole thing is built on the sore backs of clerks like you, slowly being flattened by bundles of wood. Historians still argue whether the Han administrative machine was efficient or simply obsessive, your teacher once said. Either way, it required a material more suited to mass information, a material like paper. But don't get ahead of yourself. You finally reach the minister's chambers. A low door, red banners, and an incense stick that smells like burnt noodles. The minister himself is reclining on a couch built for judgment. He doesn't rise, just flicks his fingers toward a shelf already groaning under the weight of scrolls. Place it there, he says, without looking up from the cup of tea that's been steeping since last dynasty. You do as told, resisting the urge to sigh. If that shelf collapses, you'll be the one told to reorganize it alphabetically, and you still don't know how they alphabetize characters with 7 strokes versus ones with 4. That part of the job description was assumed knowledge, and now it's back down the stairs where your toes are numb and your shoulder has gone stiff in protest. Someone passing by mutters, "More bamboo," and you just nod, eyes glazed. They don't get it. You've stopped being a person and started becoming part of the bureaucracy's circulatory system. Your blood made of ink and ligaments made of hemp string. But change is bubbling, even if you can't see it. There's talk in the workshop's whispers that someone somewhere is experimenting with cloth scraps, that they're beating them into pulp and spreading them into flat sheets. Rumor has it the early results are thin, flimsy, and flexible. Flammable, one clerk snorts. Watch a minister lean too close to a lantern, and poof, no more budget reports. Still, the rumors spread, like everything else in the empire, slowly, footstep by footstep. For now, though, you head back toward the document warehouse, where another clerk has accidentally spilled rice porridge across a crate of bamboo slips. "Don't worry," he says weakly. "It only got on the records from Fishtown." You mutter something about insurance policies and start mopping up the goo. But even as you work, you dream of something softer, something that doesn't thud when dropped, something that doesn't give you splinters or bruise your knees when you nap on it, something you can fold, and maybe, just maybe, something you can burn in secret when the report makes you look bad. The Empire doesn't know it yet, but Bamboo's days are numbered, and so are yours. If you don't take a break soon, your joints are plotting a mutiny, and your ink brush has a bald spot. All for the glory of filing tax returns nobody ever reads. As you place the soggy bamboo scrolls on a drying rack and collapse into a seated sprawl, you let your eyes flutter shut just for a moment. The buzzing of a distant fly merges with your dreams of papery alternatives. Tomorrow, you'll carry another bundle. But someday, someone else will carry sheets. Kai Lun is pacing again. That's never good. You're in the corner of the workshop, pretending to reorganize old brushes while watching the imperial eunuch mutter to himself and slap his palm against a scroll. He's been twitchy for days now, ever since he spilled ink across the emperor's ceremonial robe during a demonstration of a new military map. Not just any robe either. The gold-threaded one with dragons that only comes out for spring equinox ceremonies and extremely smug speeches. There's a rumor whispered like a curse in the latrines that Kai Lun only avoided exile because he promised the emperor a record-keeping revolution. That's right. You watched a man ruin dry clean only silk and respond with, "What if I invented a new medium for paperwork?" Classic Kai. He hasn't slept in 2 nights. The bags under his eyes look like undercooked dumplings. He's been boiling down bark and pounding hemp like he's trying to exorcise demons from raw materials. Nobody really knows what he's doing, but nobody dares stop him. That's rule 1 in the workshop. If someone has a personal vendetta against materials science, you let them cook. Today, he's got mulberry bark soaking in one vat, old fishing nets in another, and a suspicious amount of fabric scraps lying on the table like laundry day met a thunderstorm. You're asked to stir the vat. It smells horrible. Wet wood, fermented rag, and something vaguely like spoiled tofu. You stir anyway, because if Kai Lun pulls this off, you want to be on the right side of future promotions. The mixture bubbles and spits. You flinch as a glob lands on your foot, hot, sticky, kind of like porridge made by a vengeful ant. Kai Lun mumbles something about fiber separation and sloshes a ladleful onto a flat screen. He tilts it, lets the mixture settle, and presses it gently with a woven mat. Then, without blinking, He hangs it to dry on a stretched rope by the window. You squint at it. It's thin, pale, uneven, floppy, but undeniably a sheet. Historians still argue whether Kai Lun truly invented paper. You whisper to your coworker, who's too busy picking pulp from his hair to answer. Some say earlier versions existed during the Western Han or even in minor border regions. Others insist Kai was just the first to write a user manual and slap his name on it. Either way, he's the guy who made the emperor pay attention. That's the real trick, not the invention, the pitch. You watch as he peels the sheet off the drying line. It doesn't tear, it bends, it even folds, kind of. Kai Lun looks at it the way a baker might stare at their first properly risen bowsy, hopeful, hungry, a little manic. This, he announces to the air, is how we shall never lose a report to mildew again. The workshop goes silent. A clerk sneezes in the back. A rat scuttles behind a barrel. Kai Lun holds up the sheet. The light from the window passes through it, catching the pulp fibers in strange, lacy patterns. You blink. It's like looking through a moth's wing. Fragile. Yes, but more importantly, light. He tries writing on it. The brush glides. No scratching, no snagging on splinters. The ink doesn't bleed much. The characters hold. You watch the strokes dry in real time. It's mesmerizing, really. Not like bamboo, where everything takes an hour to cure and smells like someone burned a chair leg. You reach out, cautiously. He lets you touch it. It's soft. It crinkles under your fingers, and it doesn't hurt to hold. You suddenly feel the weight of every bamboo scroll you've ever carried. It's like Kai Lun just handed you a feather and whispered, "You don't have to suffer anymore." Here's a quirky detail you overhear. To make the earliest batches, Kai used old fishing nets as a source of plant fiber, meaning, technically, your first administrative report may contain traces of actual sardine breath, fishy paperwork. Quite literally. By nightfall, you've made 5 more sheets. None are perfexum tear when removed too early. Others warp like dried leaves. One catches fire after being placed too close to a lantern. But the excitement in the air is electric. And then, disaster. A high-ranking official walks in. You weren't expecting guests. He sees the hanging pulp sheets, the soggy buckets, and Kai Lun's ink-streaked face. You expect yelling, punishment, maybe a demotion to stable sweep. Instead, the official picks up a sheet, turns it in his hands, and says quietly, "Could you make this in dozens?" Kai Lun smiles. You exhale. Paper isn't officially imperial yet, but the gears have started turning. You can almost hear them, like bamboo snapping under pressure. And you roll your aching shoulders, flex your ink-stained fingers and think, Maybe next year's audit won't crush your spine after all. The courtyard smells like warm bark and wet ambition. You're back at Kai Loon's workshop, sleeves rolled, brush tucked behind your ear like a badge of invention. Today, the sun blazes over buckets of soaking hemp, bast fibers, tree bark, fish nets, and whatever else Kai thinks might qualify as pulpable. You've graduated from observer to official assistant, which mostly means you get splashed a lot and no longer get to say, "Ugh, not my job." But something is happening, a change in rhythm. The way your coworkers move, the way Kai hums under his breath. It's like watching a janky wheel start to turn smoother. The pulping process that once took days now takes hours. The beating of the fiber, the dilution in vats, the spreading over mesh screen sits getting refined. You dip your frame into the vat and lift it out slowly, watching the slurry settle. It's like a living soup. The fibers float and align themselves in a ghostly dance, then settle into place as the water drains. You press the mat gently to squeeze out moisture and hang the sheet to dry. And there it is again, a sheet of paper, a miracle, still damp. One of the workshop boys claps. You feel like a magician, only instead of pulling coins from ears, you're pulling bureaucratic dreams from bucket goop. Here's a fun fact. Modern scientists recreated ancient Han paper and found that the mulberry-based sheets were remarkably strong tensile, like a spider web, but smooth enough for precision ink work. That's right. Your sloppy pile of fibrous slop, technically a marvel of ancient engineering. Still, Kai isn't satisfied. He wants thinner, whiter, faster drying. You hear him muttering something about scaling and quality control, like he's inventing capitalism one sheet at a time. He adds bits of starch to the pulp. He filters river water through charcoal. He even tries singing to the vats once, but that mostly makes the rats nervous. Historians still argue whether Kai Loon developed the full technique alone or simply improved on centuries of folk practices, someone whispers near the water pump. But you have to admire branded it. You watch him test the ink absorption on the latest sheet. The strokes don't feather, they hold firm, proud. He nods. You exhale. It's working. You start experimenting too. You add ground rice husks. You overbeat one batch and accidentally make what Kai calls angry leather. Another clerk accidentally drops a sweet potato in the vat. The resulting sheet smells weirdly delicious. The courtyard smells like warm bark and wet ambition. You're back at Kai Loon's workshop, sleeves rolled, brush tucked behind your ear like a badge of invention. Today, the sun blazes over buckets of soaking hemp, bast fibers, tree bark, fish nets, and whatever else Kai thinks might qualify as pulpable. You've graduated from observer to official assistant, which mostly means you get splashed a lot and no longer get to say, "Ugh, not my job." But something is happening, a change in rhythm. The way your coworkers move, the way Kai hums under his breath. It's like watching a janky wheel start to turn smoother. The pulping process that once took days now takes hours. The beating of the fiber, the dilution in vats, the spreading over mesh screen sits getting refined. You dip your frame into the vat and lift it out slowly, watching the slurry settle. It's like a living soup. The fibers float and align themselves in a ghostly dance, then settle into place as the water drains. You press the mat gently to squeeze out moisture and hang the sheet to dry. And there it is again, a sheet of paper, a miracle, still damp. One of the workshop boys claps. You feel like a magician, only instead of pulling coins from ears, you're pulling bureaucratic dreams from bucket goop. Here's a fun fact. Modern scientists recreated ancient Han paper and found that the mulberry-based sheets were remarkably strong tensile, like a spider web, but smooth enough for precision ink work. That's right. Your sloppy pile of fibrous slop, technically a marvel of ancient engineering. Still, Kai isn't satisfied. He wants thinner, whiter, faster drying. You hear him muttering something about scaling and quality control, like he's inventing capitalism one sheet at a time. He adds bits of starch to the pulp. He filters river water through charcoal. He even tries singing to the vats once, but that mostly makes the rats nervous. Historians still argue whether Kai Lun developed the full technique alone or simply improved on centuries of folk practices, someone whispers near the water pump. But you have to admire branded it. You watch him test the ink absorption on the latest sheet. The strokes don't feather. They hold firm, proud. He nods. You exhale. It's working. You start experimenting too. You add ground rice husks. You overbeat one batch and accidentally make what Kai calls angry leather. Another clerk accidentally drops a sweet potato in the vat. The resulting sheet smells weirdly delicious. After a few weeks, you've developed favorites. The mulberry hybrid pulp dries quickly. Hemp gives you strength, but it flakes if overhandled. Old fishing nets work, but leave a funky scent when the humidity spikes. And then there's the moment, the one you'll remember even when you're 80 and half pulp yourself. You're crouched beside the drying line when a breeze blows through the courtyard. Several freshly made sheets flutter on the rope like prayer flags, and suddenly you see it, paper. Flat, uniform, delicate and everywhere. Not in dreams, not in rumors, but right in front of you. Dozens of them, swaying softly in the wind. You grin, then sneeze, because the drying powder gets in your nose. The moment's slightly ruined, but still magic. The other scribes come to visit. At first, they scoff. Too thin, they say. Too fragile. Then they pick it up, feel the texture, try a few brush strokes. Their eyes widen. This could change everything. And now they want to learn. The workshop turns from a secret lab to a training ground. Kai Lun supervises, corrects your technique, praises your pulp ratios, scolds your inconsistent drying times. One time, he even brings a government official to observe your process. You nearly drop your frame into the vat in panic. But the official nods. He asks questions. He orders 10 sheets. It begins. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. Some early paper batches were pressed with patterned mats, which left tiny impressions on the surfaces of a watermark before branding existed. You tried one once with a lotus design. Kai Lun called it uselessly beautiful. You took that as a compliment. Eventually, someone suggests testing the paper in actual bureaucratic conditions. You shiver. That means the record rooms, the ledgers, the dreaded imperial filing clerks, the judges of texture and durability, the nightmare committee. You deliver 5 sample scrolls made entirely from your sheets. They hold up. No splinters, no warping, no brittle snap when bent. One scroll is even crumpled and re-rolled 3 times by a suspicious officer. It survives. That night, you don't even eat dinner. You just sit in the courtyard, staring at the drying lines, at what you helped make. You run your fingers along the surface of a fresh sheet. It's soft, yielding, a little uneven at the edges, but that's charm, not flaw. It smells of clean fiber, sun, and the tiniest hint of glue. You don't know it yet, but this moment the breeze, the drying paper, the sunset tinting the pulp goldus, going to be remembered in someone's dissertation 2,000 years later. For now, you just exhale. Let your aching legs stretch out on the dusty stone tiles and drift into a light nap beneath the ropes, dreaming of a world where paper is as common as air. You're ankle deep in pulp water again. The sun is barely up, but the courtyard is already buzzing like a bureaucratic beehive. Someone spilled a basket of mulberry bark onto the walkway. A boy is yelling about screen frames. Kai Lun is shouting, "Stir faster!" from behind a cloud of steam rising off the vat like a bad omen. Welcome to paper production. Not the dreamy, breezy miracle you imagined when the first few sheets danced in the wind. This is the grind. The sloppy, drippy, sticky side of innovation, the part no scroll ever bothers to document because it smells like boiled hemp socks and failure. You're part of the morning shift. That means prepping the bark, beating fibers into submission, and trying not to step on the goose that lives under the drying racks. No one knows who brought the goose. It just appeared one day and now guards the starch pile like it's got stock options in paper making. Historians still argue whether paper-making workshops during the Han operated like centralized manufactories or loose artisan collectives, Kai mutters over his shoulder as he inspects your vat with a ladle and a skeptical frown. You're not sure who he's arguing with. There's no one else in earshot. He might be sleep debating again. Your hands are pruny from pulp. You're developing what you jokingly call calligraphy calluses, that soft ache between the thumb and forefinger from handling mesh frames all day. It's not glamorous work. You've started dreaming in fibers and screens. Your pillow feels disappointingly dry compared to the sheets you hang each day. But it is satisfying. Watching the slurry settle, watching the sheet form in your hands, lifting it just right so it doesn't ripple or wrinkle. There's an art to it now. You've ruined enough batches to understand when it feels right, like kneading dough or, executing a flawless passive-aggressive sigh in the direction of a middle manager. And the team has grown. No longer just Kai and a few desperate scribes there are now apprentices, suppliers, messengers, even one ex-silk merchant who realized the future doesn't wear Robesit writes reports. You joke that you've gone from clerk to craftsman, then to janitor, then back to clerk. One of the boys draws a cartoon of you on the back of a practice sheet. It's alarmingly accurate and depicts you drowning in a vat labeled ambition. Meanwhile, Kai is on a tear. He's experimenting again, now with plant starch coatings to improve ink absorption. The starch smells faintly of old dumplings. You learn not to leave the coated sheets near the goose. It's developed a taste for semi-finished products. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some of the first mass-produced Han paper had to be smoked to discourage bugs from eating it. The smell lingers for days. You go home reeking like you've been slow roasted in an ancient barbecue pit. Your neighbor asks if you've taken up incense blending. But the orders are coming in, slowly at first, a few scrolls for the Ministry of Agriculture, a request from the tax office, then more, a lot more. One morning you arrive to find a cart waiting. A full imperial order, 300 sheets, double-sided, ink ready. No wrinkles, no tears. Deadline, immediately. And just like that, you're no longer a side project. You're a production line, so you work faster, smarter. The team invents a rhythm soak, beat, press, dry, starch, dry again. Someone builds a double-decker drying rack. Another creates a frame-holding jig to speed up pulp application. One kid insists on naming each screen. His favorite is Flappy Chen. Every once in a while, Kai gives a weird little speech about how the pen will outlast the sword, which would be more inspiring if he didn't deliver it while covered in glue and holding what appears to be a ladle taped to a bamboo stick. There are setbacks, of course. A fire breaks out one afternoon when someone leaves oiled parchment too close to a lantern. Another time, a shipment of bark arrives full of insects, and you spend 3 hours yelling at bugs while trying not to step on the goose. But somehow you keep going because the sheets keep drying, the ink keeps flowing, and for every dozen that tear or buckle, there's one that dries smooth and clean and takes brush strokes like a dream. The imperial officials love it, not because it's beautiful, though it is, but because it's fast. Reports can be copied in hours, not days. Orders can be sent with ease. Records can be archived without turning each storage room into a minor landslide risk. And for the first time in bureaucratic history, an official actually falls asleep on a document without getting a splinter. You chuckle when you hear that. Bureaucratic naps. Now, 40% more comfortable. Kai glares at you, then writes it down in a notebook titled Marketing Ideas. At the end of one particularly grueling week, you stand in the center of the workshop, surrounded by drying lines heavy with new sheets. The sun filters through the translucent pages. They ripple slightly in the breeze, casting pale shadows across the courtyard. You feel it again, that quiet sense of awe. This isn't just an invention. It's a new language, a new rhythm, a new empire built not on stone or silk, but on soft whisper-thin fibers. You let out a sigh, sit down next to a vat, and let the day's ache melt into the stone beneath you. The goose honks approvingly. You wake up with a screen frame stuck to your face and starch in your hair. Again, production has exploded. What began as a scrappy workshop powered by ambition, fishnets, and a possibly demonic goose has now been swallowed whole by the Ministry of Revenue. You didn't even get a warning. One day, you were just brushing pulp off your robe, and the next, a messenger appeared with a scroll stamped in red. By imperial order, this workshop is now property of the Han government. Welcome to state employment. Please provide your own lunch. Now you're standing in the center of a restructured courtyard, surrounded by newly constructed drying racks, a team of 40 paper makers, and a growing tower of official forms that need duplicating. You miss the chaos of the early days, back when the worst thing that could happen was a pulp explosion or the goose eating your test samples. Now the pressure comes from all sides. Scribes from other ministries demand custom sheets. The census office wants extra-wide paper. The military division needs waterproof copies. The Agricultural Bureau has decided paper should be pest-resistant. Kai Lun is losing sleep trying to meet expectations and still occasionally mutters to himself while staring into buckets. Historians still argue whether the imperial adoption of paper was gradual or sudden. You overhear one official say as he tours the facility, but by now, the infrastructure was locked in. Translation: the paper horse is out of the barn, and the bureaucrats are galloping. You supervise 3 vats now. You've got assistants, you have meetings. Kai starts referring to you as Senior Fiber Technician, which sounds impressive until you realize it means person who explains to nobility why their paper smells like duck. Here's something weird. You now have to standardize sheets. That means measuring, stacking, weighing. One guy from the Ministry of Standards insists every paper must be the exact size of his favorite ledger. He checks with a bamboo ruler and sniffs the edge like he's sampling fine wine. To meet demand, you upgrade tools. Bigger screens, better presses. Someone builds a pedal-operated vat stirrer. A local potter makes new water troughs with tiny filters for fiber waste. You finally get a break from hand-straining pulpy sludge with your sleeve. But with growth comes nonsense. Someone insists you rename every sheet batch for inventory control. You now spend 3 hours a week labeling things like Batch 4D, minor ink splotches, acceptable for tax notices, and Batch 6B, slightly curved, recommend for memoir drafts. Paper is no longer a miracle. It's a commodity, and commodities require structure. The Imperial Document Storage Division shows up. They build a warehouse next to your workshop, which quickly fills with scrolls, ledgers, and those weird philosophical pamphlets the Emperor's nephew writes in his free time. It gets so full you start stacking things on top of clay jars, inside crates of dried fish, even between ceiling beams. You invent a filing system involving color-coded twine and a suspicious number of cinnamon sticks. Nobody questions it, probably because they're too overwhelmed to care. Here's a fringe tidbit. One warehouse clerk claims that rats have started stealing the paper to line their nests. Even vermin appreciate luxury, he says proudly, while you wonder if he's using it to justify losing half a week's records. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Public Morals orders 100 sheets for instructional scrolls on proper behavior. These include helpful topics like why crying at work is undignified and 15 acceptable ways to bow. You send them extra flimsy paper just for fun. Still, despite the growing bureaucracy, you catch glimpses of wonder. A child carrying home his first practice scroll. A retired soldier using paper to write letters to a family he hasn't seen in years. A street performer folding it into little birds and selling them as good luck charms. One flaps off into the wind and lands on your head. It's a moment. You tuck it into your robe pocket and keep it there. One morning, Kailun pulls you aside. He looks older, more tired, but his eyes still burn with that wild, mulberry-fueled fire. "This is bigger than us," he says, holding up a perfectly smooth bleached sheet. "We started a ripple. Now it's a wave." You nod, and you feel it too. The empire is adapting. Paper is spreading, not just through ministries, but through cities, temples, marketplaces. Merchants want ledgers. Teachers want handouts. Lovers want poetry that doesn't splinter. Production scales again. You expand the workshop to 2 courtyards. Triple the drying racks. Install gutters for runoff water and build a pulley system for lifting bark sacks. Someone makes a joke about how if the emperor asks for one more scroll about canal taxes, you'll write it in pulp and feed it to him. You all laugh, but also you don't. One night, exhausted, you collapse beside a rack of drying sheets and stare at the moonlight filtering through them. They shimmer like pale ghosts. You think about the weight you used to carry those old bamboo bundles that bruised your shoulders and clacked like bones. Now, a single scroll weighs nothing, and yet it holds everything. Orders, confessions, dreams, lies. You run your fingers along the edge of a fresh sheet, still soft, still strong, still strange. You smile because you helped birth a revolution. And all it took was bark, water, and an unhealthy amount of workplace yelling. Your legs ache, but your soul is floating somewhere above the rafters, possibly asleep, possibly in denial. Because today, you are reorganizing the empire's new favorite obsession, paper scrolls. Dozens of them, hundreds, thousands. You're standing in a vast storeroom recently converted from an old tax grain warehouse. It still smells faintly of millet and mouse panic, but the walls now bear painted signs in official red ink. Ministry of Records, Scroll Archive Number 3. The shelves stretch so high that your co-worker Bao once fell asleep on the top level and had to be rescued by a ladder and two men with very poor upper body strength. The records are piling up faster than the scroll boys can sort them. You're part of a new crew dubbed the Orderlies, which sounds noble but mostly involves arguing about the correct way to categorize reports from provinces that changed their names mid-decade. You pull down one particularly fat scroll labeled Cabbage Output Dispute, Year of the Iron Horse, and mutter, "This could have been 2 lines." Inside, a 73-page argument about cabbage distribution. You scan the first few lines and immediately need a nap. Because here's the thing no one tells you about innovation. Once you make things easier to produce, people start producing way too much. Especially in an empire like Han China, where every mid-level official suddenly thinks their local frog population deserves full documentation and imperial recognition. Historians still argue whether the Han bureaucracy was truly efficient or simply buried under its own paperwork, says one archivist you meet who wears 2 pairs of glasses and smells faintly of anxiety. The truth? A little of both. You glance at the Daily Scroll intake log. Over 600 new documents added in 1 week. Some are from the central ministries, others from local magistrates who've just learned about bullet points and have no idea how to stop. Here's a strange tidbit. Some paper scrolls are now being reused ink washed off with special alcohol mixtures and rewritten. They're called ghost scrolls. You read one and swear it still whispers the last report underneath. Probably not haunted. Probably. Of course, paper doesn't just make things easier. It multiplies everything. Rumors, for instance. Some junior official sends a report claiming a tiger ate 6 tax collectors in the South. It gets copied, resent, annotated. The emperor orders a full inquiry. Turns out, just one tiger, one collector. And the collector bit first. Still, the scrolls must be read, sorted, filed. Your new job involves classifying reports by region, topic, year, tone, and occasionally whim. There's a miscellaneous unexplained crop failures section that's grown so large it now occupies its own wall. One scroll contains nothing but the word cursed, followed by 17 underlined exclamation marks. But here's the part that really melts your mind. People start using paper for stuff that has nothing to do with governance. Poems, letters, theater scripts, sketches. One morning you find a scroll wedged between tax ledgers titled "The Tragedy of the Peach Garden Ghost." It's genuinely moving. You leave a tiny note at the end that just says, "Nice." You hope the writer sees it. A scholar arrives from the capital. He walks the archives with awe, trailing his fingers across the shelves like he's in love with the entire idea of organized thought. He tells you paper has begun transforming education. Actual bound books are being copied onto paper instead of silk. Students can now afford study materials. Calligraphy is booming. Tutors are buying paper in bulk. You imagine what this must feel like for the young ones. A sheet of paper handed to them not as a memo, but as a gift. A space to explore, a chance to be heard. Meanwhile, you've developed your own system for scroll storage. Color-coded ribbons, side labels, a complex drawer setup that somehow doubles as a seat for break time. One clerk calls you the paper whisperer. You pretend to hate it, but deep down you're flattered. Here's the reality. This isn't just admin work anymore. You're curating memory, preserving disputes, compromises, disasters, dreams. The smell of ink and fiber becomes comforting, like morning porridge. The rustle of unrolling scrolls, white noise for your life. There's even a corner where unreadable scrolls go. You peek at them, sometimes smudged ink, torn edges, ink blots shaped like birds. They're strangely beautiful, like failed thoughts with soft corners. One evening, as the sun filters through the slatted roof, you sit beside a pile of new reports. You hold one up, still warm from copying. It's a grain count from a northern village. Nothing special, but it's neat, balanced, written by a hand that clearly cared. You smile, because this empire, it runs on paper now. Not just to rule, but to remember, to whisper across provinces, to say, I was here, I grew cabbages, I survived the flood, I wrote this poem. You lean back on a bed of scrolls, softer than you'd admit. The whole archive hums around you, quiet, constant, full of lives etched in ink. And somewhere nearby, a fresh batch dries in the sun. The wind is up today, and the drying racks are swaying like a choir of ghosts. You're standing on the edge of the new Imperial production complex formerly, a quiet little workshop with one half-mad eunuch and a goose. Now, it's a sprawling network of covered sheds, deep vats, pulley systems, and entire squads of paper makers. Everyone's got a job, everyone's got a quota, and everyone's got ink stains in places they'd rather not discuss. You've gone from scribbling scrolls to running one of 5 state-sponsored paper yards. 5. The Empire doesn't just want paper anymore. It needs it. Desperately. Because this thing has gone global well. Continental. Orders now come in from the frontier garrisons, the coastal ports, the mountain monasteries. The Emperor has declared that all provincial governors must use paper for official correspondence, a royal decree, not optional. Even the grumpiest, bamboo-loving purists have to comply. Some of them burn their scrolls in protest. Others just sulk and keep calling it fiber fraud. And so here you are, supervising operations in a place that smells like wet bark and progress. There's a scheduling board now, a whole team dedicated to supply chain. Kai Lun's original pulp recipe has been refined into 10 regional variations. There's even a debate over branding. Should we call it official pulp or court-approved fiber paste? You propose imperial slush. It doesn't stick. Historians still argue whether the Han government managed paper production as a full-scale monopoly or allowed parallel private workshops to coexist. Your new intern says, without making eye contact, because he's terrified of you. You grunt in response and correct his drying frame placement. The truth? It's both. There are state-run yards like your Skleen, regulated, full of rules about vat temperature and brush sterilization. But there are also underground paper makers now. Tiny family setups hidden in alleys and farmsteads, pounding their own bark, soaking their own rags, undercutting you with sheets that smell like radishes and rebellion. And let's be honest, you kind of admire them. Still, you've got quotas to meet. Today's batch, 1,200 sheets, mostly for administrative use, some earmarked for court poets. One packet labeled, confidential, do not fold. You don't ask questions. Your workers fall into a rhythm splash, press, hang, dry. One sings off-key folk songs about missing goats. Another uses her elbow to shape corners, claiming it adds personality. The goose has returned, somehow, and is now unofficially in charge of quality control. It hisses at crooked sheets, but things are changing. You're no longer just making paper. You're making infrastructure, because paper doesn't stay in scrolls. It becomes letters, contracts, legal arguments, military orders. temple records. The empire has started mapping its roads on paper, shipping schedules, trade ledgers, medical records. Your fibers are in everything, even the emperor's dreams, literally. One evening, a palace aide arrives requesting 10 cloud-soft sheets suitable for transcribing dream visions. You comply. You even sent the batch with crushed lotus petals just to be extra. A week later, you hear he dreamed of flying tigers who recited tax codes backwards. You're not sure whether to feel proud or deeply worried. Here's a fringe detail. Paper's spreading influence has already begun affecting the language itself. Calligraphers now experiment with new stroke styles faster, looser, made for flowing ink on soft surfaces. Some scholars complain that handwriting is getting lazy. Others call it evolution. You call it, I can write a scroll and eat a bun at the same time. Meanwhile, an ambassador from the West shows up. Not West like the capital Far West, Silk Road West. He's got a beard like a mop and a translator with a squint. He watches your workers in stunned silence, then holds up a sample sheet like it's a holy artifact. You give him 10 to take home. A few weeks later, your intern swears he saw one of your practice sheets on a merchant's cart bound for Parthia. He might be lying, or hallucinating, or just trying to impress you. Still, you feel it in your ribs papers not just changing the Han. It's leaking. You lean against the wall of the vat shed and look out across the compound. Workers hauling bark, screens drying in rows like pale flags. A small boy carefully balancing a bucket of starch. You didn't plan this. None of you did. But the moment you poured that first pulp, the world shifted. The empire doesn't know how to stop now. Once you can copy a law 5 times in one day, you will. Once you can preserve a poem for 100 years, someone will. And once you can write a secret without worrying about bamboo creeks, well, politics gets even weirder. But it's not all lofty ideas. There's also joy. A young girl writes her name for the first time on one of your sheets and laughs so hard she drops the brush. A retired soldier keeps a tiny paper booklet of recipes by his stove. A monk folds a dozen sheets into a model of Mount Tai for his students. Paper, it turns out, isn't just storage. It's invitation. To write. To dream. To make something soft that can hold something strong. The wind shifts again. A few sheets lift from the racks and float gently to the ground. You bend to catch one. It's clean, balanced, slightly off-center. You smile. Not perfect, but enough to hold a world. The courier is sweating, not because of the heat it's mild today, a soft breeze floating over the capital. No, he's sweating because the paper scrolls tucked into his sash contain the entire revised fiscal grain storage strategy for the lower Yangtze, and he tripped over a chicken. Twice. You watch from the palace side gate as he straightens his robe and checks the scrolls again, carefully brushing dust from their edges. They're still intact miraculously. One got a small crease, which he smooths like it's a sleeping dragon. He nods to the guards, swallows hard, and disappears through the doorway. Paper has officially entered its most dangerous phase, interoffice transport. See, making paper was one thing. Using it inside ministries was another. But sending it across the empire, that's where the real drama lives. Bamboo slips could survive floods, fires, and accidental sit-downs. Paper? Less so. You've lost whole bundles to rainstorms, overturned carts, and once a goat that developed a taste for pulp. So now you're involved in the newest stage of the revolution. Logistics. You didn't ask for this. You just wanted to beat some bark and hang out with the goose. But the moment people realized paper was light enough to send overland by foot, donkey, or pigeon, yes, they tried, everything escalated. Historians still argue whether the development of paper-based courier networks laid the groundwork for later imperial communications systems, says your new supervisor, who wears too many layers and doesn't believe in jokes. You nod politely while wondering how many scrolls you can fit in a noodle basket. Today you're overseeing packaging. Not glamorous, but vital. Every scroll has to be rolled, wrapped, sometimes oiled, and always labeled in that distinctive government handwriting that tries so hard to look stern but always leans left. You've developed a few innovations. Waxed silk wraps for long journeys, sealed linen envelopes for confidential orders, reed containers for storm seasons. You even built a test tunnel and simulated moderate bandit attacks using your cousin and a bag of flour. The scrolls passed, your cousin didn't. Here's a quirky tidbit. Someone invented a paper scroll container made from hollowed-out gourds. Light, portable, and surprisingly stylish. One junior official insisted on calling them message melons. You've banned that term, but the real challenge isn't the wrapping. It's the people. Couriers, scribes, border inspectors, they all want paper, and they all treat it differently. Some handle it like it's divine. Others use scrolls as seat cushions. One clerk even used a tax report as a fan during a heat wave. That same report later appeared in court, evidence for a land dispute. The ink had melted into swirls. It looked poetic. It was not. And yet, despite everything, paper thrives. You hear rumors from the border region's governors using paper to send reports every 5 days instead of monthly. Some even experiment with early form letters. Just fill in the name of the village and the number of sheep that got away. Progress. Poets, too, are getting bolder. One writes a 200-line ballad on a single scroll, adds footnotes, and includes a fold-out diagram of emotional states. It's ridiculous. It's brilliant. You make 3 copies. the imperial courier system begins to adjust. Scribes trained in bamboo are now learning to fold, roll, and pack paper without tears. New carts are being designed with compartments for dry storage. Saddlebags are now padded with oiled wool. Every corner of communication is bending to fit the new material. And then, disaster. One stormy night, an entire shipment of court orders goes missing between Chang'an and Luoyang. Rumors fly bandits, lightning, spontaneous combustion. You're sent to investigate. Turns out, the donkey ate them. All 30 scrolls. You stare at the beast. It stares back, chewing slowly, with something that might be regret or satisfaction. You create a new rule. No scrolls stored near mouths. It becomes surprisingly hard to enforce. Still, the incident forces a breakthrough. You develop a method of wrapping scrolls in lacquered hemp, papers lightly heavier, but waterproof and donkey resistant. Someone suggests sealing official dispatches with wax stamps bearing department symbols. You love it. Until someone in the tax office stamps their entire face onto a scroll for authenticity. That batch is rejected. Here's another side effect you didn't anticipate: copying. Since paper is so much faster to produce and duplicate, multiple versions of the same document now float around. Disputes arise. Which one is official? Who wrote what first? Did someone edit the emperor's message to remove the word urgently? Now you're dealing with paper fraud. Congratulations. So you add color-coded threads, secret ink marks, even signature strokes unique to the original scribe. Suddenly, you're not just a paper maker, you're a paper detective. At night, you review courier logs, tally shipments, and test packaging methods by dunking samples in buckets of water and hitting them with sticks. You fall asleep dreaming of scrolls riding across deserts, tucked beneath cloaks, or hidden in crates of dried apricots. And always, at the center of it all, your sheets. Your sheets riding with messengers. Your sheets crossing mountains. Your sheets whispering across the empire. You never imagined you'd become the invisible voice between villages and palaces, temples and battlefields. But you are. One page at a time. You hold a finished scroll in your hand. The ink is sharp, the roll tight, the seal clean. You tuck it into a reed tube, fasten the lid, and hand it off to a courier who bows before galloping into the mist. It disappears into the road's bend. Gone. But the message flies. The emperor sneezes. It's not in your workshop, obviously. He's miles away, sealed behind lacquered doors and silk screens. But word of the sneeze reaches you within 2 hours via scroll, of course. A sharply written dispatch. His Majesty's Royal Constitution slightly disrupted by dust. Request cleaner sheets henceforth. So now you're inventing hypoallergenic paper. You squint at a sheet under the late afternoon sun, watching for invisible specks. A worker beside you is brushing dust from a stack with what used to be a broom and is now mostly wishful thinking. The goose, demoted from quality control after pecking an inspector, wanders nearby sulking. This is where paper gets absurd, because the empire has fallen in love with it. The obsession started gradually fewer bamboo bundles, lighter record keeping, but now it's full-blown dependency. Paper is in every corner of statecraft, culture, commerce, even fashion. You spot it during a festival. A noble woman wearing a headpiece made of lacquered calligraphy scraps. The characters read, "Blossoms bloom even on taxed land." You're not sure if it's art, rebellion, or both. Historians still argue whether this period marked the peak of paper's cultural integration or merely a turning point before saturation, says a passing scholar, sipping plum wine while someone fans him with what looks suspiciously like your workshop's reject batch. You've made the jump from utility to symbol. Court poets request custom textured scrolls to better reflect the cadence of longing. Students now argue over which batch of practice paper provides the cleanest ink bleed. A general orders 100 extra sheets because the troops write better when the paper respects them. You receive a scroll that's just a love letter delivered in a sealed reed case, written in lavender ink on pale cream pulp. There's a pressed plum blossom in the margin. You don't read the names, but you do smile. Somewhere out there, 2 hearts are fluttering on a sheet you dried behind the vinegar jars. Then there's the paper festival. That's right, a full-on celebration dedicated to the art of pulp. Street vendors sell folded cranes. Philosophers read aloud from one-sheet manifestos. Children scribble their names on hanging banners. You attend out of duty. You stay because a small girl hands you a drawing of a goose riding a cloud and says, "It's you." You nearly cry. Of course, not everyone is happy. Bamboo copyists are protesting. Silk scribe guilds are issuing public statements like, "Papyrus was never this pushy." Even some elders in the Imperial Academy grumble about the decay of tactile memory and pine for the good old days of scratching ink into bark like. Civilized people. You sympathize. Then you remember the back pain, the splinters, the fire hazard, the fact that one scroll once took 5 goats worth of silk. You return to your drying racks with no regrets. Here's a fringe tidbit. One official suggested turning paper into currency, literal money. Just ink a value, seal it, and circulate. The Ministry of Finance nearly choked. If people can write money, they said, they will never stop. You're pretty sure that's the dream, not the problem. Still, Kai Lun appears one morning with a prototype, a perfectly rectangular slip, soft as wind, marked with a red stamp and a value of 10 coins. You hold it, heart racing. It's not legal. Not yet, but it feels real. Everything is changing, even storage. The scroll archives are overwhelmed. Paper's so lightweight, people forget how much of it they've written. One inspector uncovers a closet with 6,000 unsorted scrolls dating back 5 weeks. Some are vital. Others include lists like names I might use for my dog. You propose bound volume stacked sheets, stitched at one side, grouped by topic. Kai calls them folios. A student calls them books. A passing monk just shrugs and starts using the format. No ceremony, just invention. And so, slowly, the scroll unrolls into the book. Paper adapts again. One poet glues sheets together into long accordion-style epics. A merchant uses folded stacks to track inventories from 10 cities. A teacher builds a workbook complete with margins for notes, practice spaces, and illustrations of different styles of trees. You tear up a little when you see it. It's clumsy, beautiful, useful. Then the imperial edict arrives. Henceforth, all court record keeping, formal reports, and correspondence shall be performed on standardized paper. Format enclosed. Deviations will be returned unread. You read it twice. Paper is no longer optional. It is law. You stand in your courtyard, hands coated in starch, watching the sun fall across your newest batch. The sheets glow gold in the light. Not just documents, not just fibers. Mandate, medium, memory. You touch one edge. It crinkles softly, like a breath. The snow falls like ash, soft and slow. You're wrapped in 3 layers, huddled inside the main workshop hall, steam rising from the vats as if the ground itself were exhaling. Outside, the courtyard is quiet for once. Every rack empty, every line slack. Even the goose has retreated to some warm place you're frankly jealous of. But inside is where the real warmth lives now. Not just in the steam, or the boiled bark, or the hot rice wine someone slipped you. It's in the rhythm, the calm, the quiet understanding that this isn't just production anymore, it's preservation. You're no longer racing to meet quotas or experimenting with new coatings. The pace has softened. The empire has adopted paper as its pulse, and now, in this lull between official decrees and spring renewals, you get to reflect. You sit on a stack of bundled reams and trace the grains of a fresh sheet. The fibers whisper under your fingertips. You can almost feel the thousands of hands that will hold these pages next. Because now, you're sending paper into time. Scrolls aren't just for orders anymore. They're being archived, tucked away in underground vaults, palace libraries, temple vaults, and not just government records. Everything. Births, deaths, land transfers, seasonal poems, astrological predictions, dream journals, war reports, a letter from a merchant to his mother, a recipe for boiled carp that won't scare guests, all of it immortalized in pulp. Historians still argue whether this explosion of recorded information improved transparency or simply gave future archivists migraines, mutters one scholar as he stamps a crate labeled Provincial Gossip, Volume 12. And you? You're part of it. You've even got a title now, Master of the Pulpworks. Sounds like a strange novel, but it comes with a seal and the right to approve scroll batches for official archive use. The first time you pressed your seal into a red wax disc, you nearly cried. The second time, you got it stuck on upside down and had to redo 400 copies. Progress isn't pretty. The Imperial Library sends you a visit. The chief archivist is a small, serious woman with ink stains on her eyelids and a voice like an eraser. She inspects your racks. She tests your sheets. She holds one up to the light and murmurs, "Yes, yes, this will keep." She means the paper. She means the past. Here's a fringe detail. Some temples have started writing sacred texts on waterproofed paper, sealed in bamboo tubes and buried in dry stone chambers. Not for today, not even for tomorrow. For centuries later, in case the world forgets itself. You stand over one of these time vaults and feel something twist gently in your chest. The first time you see your own name written on archival paper, it's a report. Pulp Master's report on winter bark yield. Honest and thorough, handwriting legible, goose absent. You laugh. Then you file it in the routine reports drawer, beside 17 others just like it. It will sit there for 100 years, maybe longer. Another unexpected trend, paper wills. Previously, death declarations were whispered to monks or scratched onto wood. Now, people write them down. Full thoughts, farewells, instructions. There's a stillness in those scrolls that stops you cold every time. Paper, it seems, is a mirror of everything, even endings. A boy comes to the workshop, 8, maybe 9, curious eyes. He asks if he can see the paper vats. You nod. He watches, silent, as the bark boils and the screens drip. Then he turns and asks, "If I write something and keep it safe, will it live longer than me?" You pause and then say, "Yes," because that's the truth of it. Once ink meets fiber, it defies breath, outlasts weather, defies memory's drift. Somewhere out there, your earliest batches are still being read, still teaching, still echoing. And the Empire knows it. They've started dispatching preservation scribes, young recorders who travel from town to town collecting stories. They don't judge, they just write. A farmer's song, a widow's warning, a teacher's lesson, each one on fresh, soft sheets, bound in leather, stored in sealed cabinets with moth-repelling herbs. You send them your best batches. Each time, you whisper a little blessing into the drying rack. Stay strong. Carry their words. Remember. Some nights, you stay late, sitting by the parchment fire, sorting through sample scrolls and odd scraps. You find a sheet from your early Dason even, brittle, full of air bubbles. It makes you smile. You didn't know what you were doing then. You do now. You wrap it in twine and tuck it in your satchel not to discard, but to keep. A relic of a moment when the empire was still listening for its voice, and you were just a clerk with wet sleeves and big dreams. The snow falls harder now. The vat's cool. You stoke the stove, the fibers steep, and all around you, silence grows gentle. This is not the end, but it's a pause, a moment to breathe, because the next chapter, it waits in pulp. Spring crashes into the capital like a drunk festival drummer, too loud, too early, and covered in peach blossoms. You're sneezing again, but this time it's not imperial allergies. It's the smell of newness. Fresh bark, fresh ink, and a ridiculous number of requests for limited edition spring equinox commemorative poetry paper. You knew it would happen. With every season, the empire finds a new excuse to dress up its obsession. This year's trend? Paper personalization. You thought the bureaucracy was bad before. Now every governor, merchant guild, and aspiring philosopher wants custom sheets, colored edges, embedded flower petals, gold-flecked margins, scented with pine, dyed with tea. Someone even requested slightly sad blue pulp suitable for breakup letters. You blinked, then delivered, because business is booming. Historians still argue whether Han-era papercraft reached the level of true art or remained an advanced administrative tool, says a visiting noble while examining a sample of your new cloud-weight vellum. You nod politely and wonder whether to mention the goose helped test ink absorption by walking across it. Meanwhile, the courts are using paper for increasingly creative purposes. Last week's petition included diagrams of a proposed floating tax office. Another detailed a complaint about neighbors singing too loudly, complete with musical notation. You read it 3 times before realizing it was in 5-part harmony. You sang it. You regret nothing. Artisans now line the streets with folding stands of hand-pressed sheets, brush-painted sheets, scrolls bound with horsehair. One old man makes tiny paper figurines that dance when placed over incense. A child asks if yours will too. You say no. The goose honks, and she's satisfied. Here's a fringe detail. Underground poets have started using paper to distribute forbidden verses. They write them in lemon juice, only visible when warmed by candlelight. The Ministry of Harmony is furious. You're impressed. Meanwhile, production logistics have leveled up. Your workshop now has teams for everything: sourcing, stirring, drying, testing, rolling, even scenting. There's a woman who does nothing all day but choose which batch should smell like jasmine and which should smell like intellectual effort. You don't ask. Then there's the Imperial Paper Review Board. It's real and awful. A rotating council of officials who inspect sheets for flaws. One critic calls your latest batch too emotionally forward. You pretend to understand. Another frowns and says, "This paper feels ambitious." You nod solemnly and mutter something about fiber confidence. Still, you play along, because paper now reaches everywhere, even the battlefield. Yes, even there. Military units are using paper maps, orders, quick transcriptions of enemy movements. A general writes a letter to his wife from the front using one of your sheets. You hear she framed it and sent back a haiku that made him cry. You feel strangely proud. Monks use it to copy entire sutras, sometimes in miniature script, so fine you need a magnifying pebble to read it. Teachers assign paper homework. Students pretend they're allergic. Street performers use it to design puppet shows. One scholar invents a paper model of the solar system. It catches fire. He claims it was symbolic. People live in paper now. It's part of their rhythm. A merchant keeps ledgers that look like epics. A matchmaker sends out client profiles with illustrated faces and suggested poetic compliments. One woman opens a shop where customers describe a memory, and she writes it down on bespoke sheets, folds it into a crane, and says, "Keep this. When it fades, you'll know it's time to make new ones." You spend days just watching. The drying racks are full again, not just with orders but hope. Quiet, strange, stubborn hope. The kind that hides between lines and fibers. The kind that you don't always see until a scroll is unrolled 20 years later and someone gasps softly at the handwriting. And through it all, Kai Lun remains tireless, a little grayer, a little quieter, but still sharp. He calls you into his quarters one evening, shows you something under a silk cloth, a new paper, light as breath, finer than silk, made with fermented bark and water drawn from a mountain spring known for producing unusually docile frogs. You hold it. It's cool, strong, pale as snow, and in that moment you realize the empire will never go back. Not to bamboo, not to silk, not to silence. This is its voice now. Its story, its daydreams and declarations, its taxes and love songs, its tantrums and wisdom, all preserved in pulp and pressed by hand. You return to the workshop with fresh resolve, reorganize the tool room, refine the folding technique, teach the new apprentices how to listen to a batch of fiber, because yes, it talks if you're patient. You learn to predict humidity by the way the paper curls. You name your best drying frame Fortune. It's never let you down. And when you walk through the streets, you notice the way people carry their scrolls now, tucked into belts, wrapped like gifts, carried with care. Once, a man ran past, scroll under his arm, face beaming. "They finally approved my farm," he shouted. "I exist." And you knew. You helped make that moment. You and bark and steam and a lot of sleepless nights. You stand by the vat, dip your screen, lift, and let the empire's next sentence drip quietly into form. Mid-autumn, the moon is fat and smug, and everything smells like roasted chestnuts and burnt ink. You're sitting on the roof of your workshop, legs dangling over the edge, a cup of hot chrysanthemum tea steaming in your hand. Below, the city murmurs. Scroll merchants packing up, poets shouting drunken metaphors at the moon, children chasing each other with paper lanterns shaped like turtles and tax officials. You've never been busier, because now everyone writes. Not just officials, not just poets, everyone. Farmers, bakers, sailors, midwives. Your own mother sends you a scroll titled "Suggestions for Improving Your Posture and Reputation." You don't open it yet. It's beautiful and chaotic. There's a waiting list for sheets now. You had to open a second workshop. Your name is in demand across the empire and not always in flattering ways. One scroll reads, "If this page bleeds again, I will sue that pulp charlatan with the goose." The goose remains deeply unbothered. You're overseeing more than production now. You've become a kind of paper ambassador, traveling to villages and courts, temples and archives, teaching people how to store, fold, label, reuse, recycle. Because yes, recycling is a thing now. Used scrolls are being repulped into rougher stock perfect for drafts, scribbles, and students learning calligraphy. One student writes 4,000 times, "I will not draw birds on tax reports." On recycled paper, of course. Historians still argue whether the widespread civilian adoption of paper in the Han Dynasty was driven more by necessity or cultural enthusiasm, says a provincial historian you meet on the road, brushing mold off his notes and eating what might be paper-wrapped dumplings. You both agree it's probably both. Because the more people write, the more they want to write, and the more they want to read what others wrote. So now reading rooms exist, quiet spaces in tea houses where people can borrow scrolls, read them aloud, and debate whether the 5th line of Ode to the Dusty Moonbeam is better than the 7th. And books. Books are blooming. At first, just practical ones, instructional manuals, grain charts, star maps, but then storybooks, fiction. One boy writes a tale about a ghost who haunts a census official and makes him fall in love with bureaucracy. It's weirdly touching. You cry a little. People are printing now. Not with machines, not yet, but with stamps, blocks, repeated brush stencils, mass production in its earliest twitch. One temple invents a way to copy texts 5 times faster using a flip and smash ink block technique. The walls of your second workshop now carry posters printed this way. Your favorite? A quote, "The brush is louder than the bell." It's not just literature. Paper is powering thought. Thinkers publish arguments, debates, disputes. A famous philosopher writes a treatise on ethics, followed by a rebuttal from his wife titled, "Yes, but you leave your shoes everywhere." It becomes a scroll room favorite. Paper has made thought portable, repeatable, contagious, and also dangerous. The emperor's advisors begin to worry. Some scrolls contain ideas not everyone likes. Questions about taxes, about laws, about the limits of power. A scholar in the South disappears after distributing a paper titled, "The Wind Should Be Shared." You never meet him, but someone passes you a copy and the paper is your own batch. You run your fingers over the ink, faint, shaky, brave. You can't unread it. Here's a fringe ripple. A small town begins using paper ballots to vote on local festivals. Which food stall, which play, which cousin gets to run the donkey race. It's informal, chaotic, glorious. Not everyone approves. One prefect declares, "Too much writing leads to weak morals and floppy wrists." You mail him a handwritten list of floppy-wristed war heroes on scented paper. Still, the tide is clear. Paper is now a right. People feel entitled to it, like water, like bread, like memory. You visit a tiny school where the teacher uses hand-copied scrolls to teach reading. The students pass them around like treasure. One boy reads a poem out loud, stumbles, then laughs, then reads it again better. You sit in the corner and try not to cry. Again, this is what paper does. It levels. Not completely, not fairly, but enough. Enough for a shepherd girl to write a haiku beside her fire. Enough for an old soldier to record his dreams. Enough for an apprentice to draw a design for a new cartwheel and send it to a guild in the capital. And every sheet they touch, you helped make. So you expand again, not bigger, just wider. You send pulp presses to new regions, train locals, share recipes. One widow sends you a letter months later. "We made our first batch. It held. My grandson smiled. It's your favorite scroll in the world. You hang it above your desk. And when the harvest festival comes, someone presents you with a gift. A bound collection of stories written by people who used your paper. Farmers, singers, carpenters. One page just says, Thank you for giving my words a place to land. You press the book to your chest, and for the first time in years, you feel full, not just of work, but of meaning. You're in a boat. Well, not a boat, exactly. It's a glorified wooden crate with dreams of grandeur, floating down a slow tributary of the Yangtze. Behind you, crates stacked high with sealed scrolls, tied folios, wrapped ledgers. In front of you, reeds, ducks, and one very unimpressed fisherman. You're taking your first shipment to the southwestern provinces. Why? Because they wrote you several times on moss green paper with excellent calligraphy. The final scroll simply read, "We've heard the whispers. Send paper or send regrets." So here you are, hand-delivering reams to a town that's never seen a goose-shaped watermark before. And oh, this place. It's humid, lush, so green it feels like the trees are trying to read over your shoulder. The moment you arrive, people swarm the docks, not for you, mind you, but for the boxes. They touch them like they might sing. A young girl holds up a single sheet and says, "I dreamed this texture once." You tell her she probably just touched too much mulberry bark, but quietly, you're beaming. Paper has gone rural, and the countryside is hungry for it. Not for fancy poems or 5-paragraph legal debates, but for practical magic. Calendars, seed logs, marriage records, fishing schedules. One village elder asks for 20 blank scrolls just to draw the fish he's caught in the last year. He says, "If I write them down, maybe next year, they'll feel obligated to return." You don't question it, because this is expansion. Historians still argue whether rural adoption of paper technology outpaced urban innovation in the late Han period, mutters your assistant, who's now somehow sunburned and rained on. You ignore him and watch a child fold your sheet into a frog. It jumps, kind of. Everywhere you go, there's something new. A traveling scribe sets up shop near a banyan tree and writes people's stories for 2 coins a tale. A couple builds a wall of scrolls to insulate their winter home. One family uses old reports to wallpaper their ceiling, claiming it helps them dream more responsibly. And the rivers. Oh, the rivers carry more than fish and gossip now. They carry your paper floating on boats, tucked into bundles, protected by waxed cloth. Information ripples downriver. A recipe from a mountain town ends up in a coastal tavern. A joke told by a border guard becomes a play in a school. Paper becomes the bloodstream of the empire, and like any bloodstream it connects. You feel it as you travel, the pull of language stretching over hills and forests, bending through dialects and idioms, stitched together by ink and pulp and stubborn human need. In a coastal village, you meet a woman who's turned paper into music. She writes notes on strips and strings them across bamboo reeds. When the wind blows, it plays her melody. She says, "It's not always accurate, but neither is love. You write that down. Of course, not everything is peaceful. You arrive in one town to find counterfeit paper everywhere, your formulas duplicated, your stamps faked. Even your goose watermark has been copied, except theirs has 3 legs. You're livid. But the paper? It's good. Almost too good. You meet the culprit. A teen with ink-stained hands, big ideas, and no regard for patents. He says, "I thought if paper could spread truth, it should also spread faster." You don't arrest him. You offer him a job. Here's a fringe delight. A mountain temple creates a paper maze, scrolls layered and folded into corridors. Visitors enter to lose themselves in thought. You get lost in there for 3 hours and emerge with 6 new philosophies and mild dehydration. Meanwhile, in a dusty crossroads inn, someone hands you a letter meant for a monk halfway across the empire. You ask why. They shrug and say, "You look like someone who finishes things." You sigh. Take the letter, add it to the pile, because now you're trusted. Not just your paper, you. Everywhere you go, people see you as a messenger, a bringer of words, a witness, and it's humbling, also terrifying, also extremely heavy, because those crates are not lifting themselves. You hire a donkey, the donkey bites you, you name it justice. Still, the journey continues. You teach a weaver how to make fiber strips thinner. You help a merchant preserve his ledgers from mildew. You show a schoolboy how to fold a sheet into quarters without creasing the characters. He bows. You cry. Again. And one night, camped beside a river, you unroll a scroll you received weeks ago, a letter from Kai Lun. It's short. They say we changed the empire. I think we just gave it somewhere to write. You stare at the words. Then you stare at the moon. Then you add your reply. And somewhere to remember. You let the scroll dry in the open air. Fold it gently and place it in the pouch beneath your Robinex to a child's drawing. A merchant's receipt, a prayer from a stranger, and a blank sheet you're saving for the perfect sentence. Because the journey's not done, and there's always another scroll to carry. You wake up to rain, not a storm, just that soft, thoughtful kind of rain that makes everything sound like it's sighing. Outside your window, the bamboo creaks. A few leftover scrolls hang from the rafters, drying one last time before they go out into the world. Today is your last day at the workshop. Not forever, just for now. After years of boiling bark, pressing pulp, dodging bureaucrats, soothing crying scribes, and outwitting counterfeiters, you've been summoned back to the capital, not for punishment, for recognition. Kai Lun, now retired and living next to a plum orchard, nominated you for an Imperial Merit Ribbon. You told them paper doesn't need medals. They replied with the metal anyway. You look around your little kingdom walls stained with decades of steam, floors scarred by heavy vats, shelves bowed with ink pots and poetry experiments. Your tools are worn smooth. Your goose has gone feral again and is currently nesting in the discarded shipping labels pile. It's all perfect, or at least perfectly yours. You walk the aisles slowly, running your fingers over racks and screens. So many students have passed through here. Some went on to open their own mills. Others wrote books. One started a paper folding club that may or may not be a front for romantic gossip. You approve. The workshop is quiet this morning. Just you and the hum of drying sheets. You check the last batch. Soft, clean, whisper thin, good lines. They'll hold. You wrap them in cotton and tie the bundle with a crimson thread. You hesitate. Then write something on the top sheet. To those who will write tomorrow, use this well. You set it aside. Historians still argue whether the Han paper revolution's true legacy lies in its bureaucracy, its artistry, or its sheer scale of cultural saturation, murmurs a scribe from the corner, scribbling without looking up. He's quoting someone. You don't correct him. You just smile, because you know the truth. The legacy is none of those things. The legacy is a child's story about a cloud. It's a mother's handwriting in the margins of a recipe. It's the ink smear of a tax officer who fell asleep at his desk. It's the love letter folded into a food pouch and carried 400 miles on horseback. That's what paper carries, not just content, moments. You walk outside, down the slick stone path, rain tickling your neck. The air smells like damp bamboo and old promises. Your students wait at the gate. One hands you a gift, a small book, hand-bound, filled with favorite sayings, sketches, test swatches, failed drafts, pressed leaves, and exactly one smear from where someone dropped it in their soup. You flip through it slowly. You close it carefully. You say, "It's perfect." And it is. You mount your cart just as the donkey chewing something questionably edible and set off. The road is muddy. The sky is gray. The scrolls in your satchel are dry and ready. You don't look back. You don't need to. The work will continue. It always does. You've trained the next generation. You've taught them to listen to fiber, to love failure, to fold gently, to stir slowly. You've given them paper. You've given them memory. And now, as the trees blur past and the wind flicks drops against your cheeks, you realize you didn't just make paper. You helped the world slow down and notice and remember. You reach the next village at sunset. They're waiting. A classroom needs scrolls. A couple wants a wedding book. Someone has written a play. You unload your cart. You stretch. You smile, and with ink-stained fingers and tired knees, you lift your first sheet of the evening and begin again. The rain falls softer now. It taps gently on rooftops, weaves through distant bamboo, hushes the earth into stillness. Your workshop, once alive with voices and steam, is quiet. The racks stand empty. The vats have cooled. The goose is asleep, maybe dreaming of scrolls. And you're resting now. No more parchment to stir, no more scrolls to roll. Just this moment, this long, slow breath after centuries of motion. Imagine yourself walking once more through those old paper halls. Your footsteps are soft. The air smells of ink, rice starch, old bark. In the corner, a scroll dries under candlelight. It hums faintly, like it remembers everything. You reach out, not to read, just to feel it. The fibers are warm. The stories are sleeping. Outside, the world spins. On letters are sent, receipts stamped, poems penned in moonlight. Someone somewhere opens a folded page and gasps, and far away, a child presses her palm against a blank sheet, wondering what words will live there next. You've done your part. You've made something that lingers, that carries, that matters. Now the lights are dim, the ink settles, and the empire sleeps soundly, cradled in paper. Shh. It's quiet now. You're safe. You're home. Sleep.